Greetings, all my iconic individuals out there. I was thinking quite recently that I haven't made a villain analysis video since that Hopper one I did a while back, and that's still one of my most popular and viewed videos to this day. So it got me thinking, why not do another villain analysis, eh? But instead of analyzing a Pixar villain, why not do a Disney animation villain instead? My favorite Disney animation villain, to be specific. That, of course, being Judge Claude Frollo from the Hunchback of Notre Dame. Firstly, I would like to dispel the misconception that Frollo is the most evil Disney villain and nothing more. Firstly and foremostly, he isn't technically the most evil Disney villain. I mean, when the likes of Maleficent and the Horned King exist, it's pretty hard to beat them. But on top of that, there is significantly more to Frollo than just being evil. And that's one of the main reasons I wanted to make this video, on top of just the fact that Frollo doesn't get as much love as he actually deserves. But because I wanted to shed a light on all those aspects of Frollo that constantly get ignored. The things that actually make him really deep and compelling as a villain. Pretty much all of this revolves around the central theme of the movie. An idea brought up at the very beginning. A question proposed by that one character's name who I can't actually remember. I'm sorry, guys.
Clopin will tell you.
But the question he asks is,
Who is the monster and who is the man?
it should go without saying that the theme of this movie is much like many others I've covered on this channel so far, in that you shouldn't judge people based on their outward appearances alone, and that what truly makes them good or evil is what's on the inside. That's what really matters. This mainly connects to Quasimodo, who looks ugly on the outside but is actually a really nice, kind-hearted soul on the inside. Yet he is rejected by society for all his life and made a mockery of when he tries to fit in. But this only makes the ending more satisfying when he finally is accepted, after proving to society that he is a good man and not a monster like they believe. And then, on the flip side, you have the subject of today's video, Judge Claude Frollo, someone who seems like a man, but is really a monster underneath. A wolf in sheep's clothing. Though Frollo may seem reasonable and good in how he speaks and presents himself, it is all the ways that he hides his evil and monstrous side from not only the rest of the world, but himself as well, that makes him such a compelling villain. One of the first things that immediately stands out about Frollo compared to most other villains, in general, not just Disney animation villains, just most villains in general, is that he's a member of the church, and thus sees himself as a good man fighting against evil in the name of God. However, Frollo's idea of becoming holy means seeing more evil in everyone else, therefore self-justifying himself as the holiest.
And he saw corruption everywhere, except within.
Of course, this is all just nonsense, as almost all of Frollo's actions contradict this idea, due to the fact that Frollo is actually significantly more selfish than most other people. His actions are not exactly pure, but because he always has to see himself as the holiest person in town, he must vilify everyone else in order to make himself look the best. Essentially, he has lowered the bar of what not only makes you holy, but also what makes you worthy of death and punishment. One of the reasons he acts so aggressively throughout the movie is because, in order to maintain this illusion that he is holier than everyone else, he must be constantly proving that he is better than someone else, so that the rest of the world actually believes that he is. Frollo represents the worst kind of people in society, those who put themselves on top by pushing others below them to artificially increase their height. The opening scene of The Hunchback of Notre Dame is almost certainly the greatest opening to any Disney animated movie ever made, and part of that is just how intimidating they make Frollo as soon as he appears. One of the very first things Frollo does in this entire movie is kill someone on screen, that being Quasimodo's mother. Not only is it rare for a Disney villain to actually kill someone, but to do it on screen right before our very eyes. Truly a once-in-a-blue-moon event. But this is all the better for Frollo's characterization, as it just makes him stand out even more. You would think murdering an innocent woman on screen would force Frollo to live with this guilt for the rest of his life. Yet, he consistently tries to ignore this fact and bury it deep down, as if he had never committed the deed in the first place. His first thought upon seeing Quasimodo is that the child is hideous. Because he hates the supposed hideousness of Quasimodo so much, he decides that he shouldn't exist in this world. And when he goes to kill him, he has to justify his actions by reducing this human baby to something inhuman so that he can get away with murder, literally.
This is an unholy demon. I'm sending it back to hell, where it belongs.
However, his self-inflicted illusion of holiness is briefly broken when he is called out by a man who, deep down, he knows is holier than him, the Archdeacon.
But you never can run from nor hide what you've done from the eyes.
This is one of the only moments in Frollo's life where he reconsiders his thoughts and actions. The idea that God and the saints of old are watching him and his eternal soul may be at risk is enough to snap him to his senses. I'm always a fan of villains who are aware of their flaws and attempt to either overcome those flaws or bury them. In this case, it's definitely the bury option. I should also mention that his station is as a judge, and it is clear that he takes his position very seriously. Too seriously. Frollo abuses his power, believing that he is so holy, no action he commits could ever be bad. He didn't think killing Quasimodo's mother was a bad thing because he put himself on such a pedestal that he believed he could do no wrong. And if something does go wrong because of his actions, then he will always just find someone else to use as a scapegoat and place the blame on. And as I mentioned before, he only keeps his station in power not because he deserves it, but because he manipulates others into thinking they are lesser than him, and thus he is the most deserving of this power. And as for his care of Quasimodo, he doesn't take care of him because he actually cares, but because he is afraid of what might happen to him if he doesn't. Frollo sees Quasimodo as a disgrace to society, and thus he must be locked away forever. But Frollo must maintain his quote-unquote pureness, and thus he has decided that it is the rest of the world that will hate Quasimodo and see him as this horrible creature, but not him. He just pretends like he doesn't actually hate Quasimodo, and thus he manipulates Quasimodo into thinking that he's the good guy and the rest of the world is the villains. This, of course, being the primary example of how he tricks people into this illusion that he is pure and holy. Truly evil people who are on the same level as, or somehow even lower than Frollo, will obviously be seen as evil by the outer world, and thus Frollo can easily claim that he is above them. But even the pure, good-hearted people dare not call out Frollo because they are too afraid of saying that someone who is supposedly holy is not. Despite claiming to have the high ground, Frollo enjoys when his enemies suffer, a clear sign of a man with lacking morals. And furthermore, he hates it when people treat those he dislikes with kindness. When he watches Quasimodo get assaulted, he is satisfied because he feels justified that he was right. And Quasimodo is just as hideous as he first believed him to be.
A lesson needs to be learned here.
And so he is furious when Esmerelda dares to defend him, as she represents a threat to potentially ruining his illusion. And speaking of Esmerelda, one of the other major key elements of Claude Frollo's character, one that many people have brought up many times before, that of course being his lust for Esmerelda. And you gotta respect Disney for having the guts to make one of their villains' main traits being lustful. But of course, if you ask me, this just makes Frollo all the better of a villain for it, as lust, of course, is a very realistic flaw. Unlike mindless ambitions of evil and destroying the world, lust is something that can come prey on anyone, even a man who believes himself to be holy. Frollo desperately wants to ignore his lust for Esmerelda and dislike her, but he convinces himself that no one like him could ever have such lowly thoughts.
So typical of your kind to twist the truth, to cloud the mind with unholy thoughts.
Once more, pretending his flaws don't exist. And now seems like the perfect time to discuss the masterpiece known as Hellfire. This song is one of the most critically acclaimed and highly praised Disney songs ever written, and for good reason. It's one of the few times that we get an in-depth, deep dive into the very thought process of how the villain himself thinks. Whilst Disney is known for their great songs, few of them have the same level of depth as this one. The first thing Frollo does in this song is proclaim how great and pure he is.
Beata Maria, you know I am a righteous man.
So that he pre-establishes that everything else he's about to say doesn't really matter because he's already perfect. What makes this song so interesting is that Frollo genuinely believes that he is a good person. He has hardwired himself to believe that. Yet at the same time, he clearly knows that these lustful feelings he has are not good. But how can you simultaneously be perfect and also have bad lustful feelings? And the answer, of course, is you can't. Frollo refuses to see any errors in himself, so he blames Esmerelda for his own lust.
It is the gypsy girl, the witch who sent this flame,
claiming that she is the one making him feel these things, even though it is his own lack of self-control and morality that causes him to lust for her. I should also note the heavy emphasis that Frollo puts on the word sin when he finally admits his guilt.
is turning me to sin.
He says it with such hesitation and dread, as the very last thing he would ever want to do is admit that he ever did anything wrong. Even when he reluctantly admits his guilt to himself, he still refuses to take full responsibility, now choosing to blame Satan for giving him these thoughts.
He made the devil so much stronger than a man.
On top of the amazingly dark lyrics, the visual symbolism in this song is insanely good. I especially want to point out a few really great examples. First being, when the red-robed figures representing the saints of the past appear and look upon Frollo from above, judging him for his unholy ways, before transforming into flames that surround Frollo, flowing into the fireplace, as if they are pulling him to his ultimate fate, perfectly representing what will happen if he doesn't turn from his evil ways. Later, when the guard shows up at the door in a glowing white light, conveniently placed at the opposite side of the room, far from Frollo, he brings word that Esmerelda has gone. This should be a weight lifted from Frollo's shoulders. But instead, given the opportunity to give up his lust, he actively chooses to ignore his way out and chase after his desires instead. And lastly, when he asks God to have mercy on him, he is backing up from the fire.
God have mercy on me.
Demonstrating that when he is willing to admit his flaws, he moves closer to the light and away from evil. That, in theory, he can still reject evil and do good instead. Unfortunately, he does not do this. Throughout this entire song, we can clearly see that Frollo is a man at war with himself. But instead of realizing the error of his ways and trying to change for the better, he instead chooses to double down and cover up his flaws, pretending that they're someone else's fault. After this, Frollo continues to disguise his evil by projecting it onto the gypsies. He secretly wishes to find Esmerelda to make her his own, but he pretends that his actions are in the name of justice. And furthermore, when interrogating Quasimodo, he places the blame of his actions of burning Paris onto Quasimodo, trying to make him believe that the burning of Paris is Quasimodo's fault for letting Esmerelda escape, not his.
Now all Paris is burning because of you.
He's only burning these buildings and killing people because he has to undo Quasimodo's mistake. And there's a really underrated moment of depth added to Frollo's character that happens during this scene that I never hear anyone bring up. But while he's trying to guilt trip Quasimodo, he tries using his lie that Quasimodo's mother was the one who really hated him, and that he saved him. But by mentioning Quasimodo's mother, it reminds him of that one moment, the only time he ever felt afraid of his immortal soul, that his actions may not be entirely pure.
Think of your mother.
And after mentioning this, he gives up. He stops trying to guilt trip Quasimodo and leaves. It's these little sprinkles throughout the movie of potential redemption hiding within Frollo that make him such a great villain and so vastly underrated compared to so many others, even underrated by people who like him. But anyways, speaking of Frollo following Quasimodo, another box that Frollo ticks on the good villain list is that of temporary success. I find that villains who only fail in their plans of evil are not exactly great villains. Almost every good villain there ever was has to have at least some sort of partial success rate. This makes the villain even more hateable, in a good way, of course. At last we have the finale, where Frollo is willing to lower his standards and ruin his integrity if he has something to gain. The thing to gain in this instance being Esmerelda, since he is willing to forego her punishment that he has deemed on her only if she will become his. Additionally, a brief line that adds an extra layer of depth on top of this, that further connects this to Frollo's overarching illusion and lies to himself that he is pure, is that he believes that if he makes Esmeralda his, he'll be saving her from evil and redeeming her.
The gypsy Esmeralda has refused to recant.
Therefore, whether she becomes his or he kills her, he wins both ways, despite the fact that both are evil. All these actions combined is what makes Frollo so despicable, and what further makes the scene where Quasimodo breaks free and saves Esmeralda so epic and satisfying. Letting the villain have temporary success just makes their downfall even more satisfying. But Frollo is now done letting Quasimodo ruin his plans, and now he simply wants to kill him. But once more, he must justify his hatred and evil desire for death by vilifying Quasimodo as unloyal and insolent. But really, he only hates him because of how he keeps preventing him from getting what he desires. Frollo's death is probably the most poetic and well-written of any Disney villain. Not only does he die because of his own actions, but we see all his buried evil come to surface in the finale, revealing his true nature at the end. This is extra evident in how he no longer calls even Quasimodo by his name, reducing him to the Hunchback.
The Hunchback and I have unfinished business to attend to.
And once he unburies all this darkness, he has crossed the line from an evil man convinced that he is good to an evil man who cannot hide his evil anymore.
Listen to me, Quasimodo.
No, you listen! All my life you have told me that the world is a dark, cruel place. But now I see that the only thing dark and cruel about it is people like you.
Now that he has proven he is no longer redeemable, this is when God judges him unworthy. In this moment, Frollo realizes that he failed, and all his life choices flash before him. But it's too late. He had every chance to choose good and reject evil, but instead he refused to acknowledge the error of his ways and blamed all his problems on other people instead, punishing them for his crimes. And thus he falls to his flaming death, of course meant to represent his descent into hell. It is also simply perfection that God gets the last blow against Frollo. I can think of no more a satisfying defeat than a man who believes he is perfect being rejected by God, the only one who is actually perfect. The one that Frollo pretended to be on the same level as. In conclusion, Frollo is my favorite Disney villain because he is both evil yet not irredeemable at the same time. But on top of that, it's just so satisfying to see him choose the wrong path every time, only for it to end in his ultimate demise. You can see him slowly unraveling as the plot goes on, until he reaches that breaking point in the finale. The moment you know all hope of his redemption is completely gone. And with all that in mind, a valuable lesson can be learned from Frollo's failure to see the light. That we cannot become slaves to our inner demons and pretend they don't exist. That will only lead to our destruction. Everyone has flaws. As small as they may seem, we must admit them and strive to live above them, not by pretending to be better people, but by actually confronting our flaws and snuffing them out. Overall, a truly genius and masterfully written villain in the Disney catalog, who we will probably never see the likes of ever again due to how dark he is. And that is why I believe Judge Claude Frollo is the very best Disney villain of all time. Well, there it is, all my thoughts on Frollo Explained. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to leave a like, tell me what you thought of the movie and Frollo in the comments down below, subscribe for future content, and if you really enjoy my content, then you can join and become a channel member, or perhaps support me on Patreon, but only if you have the money available, of course. But don't go just yet, as I have a lot more content on this channel that you should check out. If you're running low on time, don't worry. My previous villain analysis on Hopper is pretty short, and you can check that one out pretty quickly. Or, if you have tons of time remaining, why don't you check out my previous video, where I tear apart the cinematic atrocity known as Ralph Breaks the Internet. It's nearly feature length. But most importantly of all, stay iconic.